Have you ever woken up to find something that had been there all your life, simply gone? Not moved, not destroyed, but erased, like it was never there in the first place. On the morning of April 4th, that's exactly what the people of Millhaven woke up to. Their lake, the centerpiece of their quiet little town, had vanished overnight. No flood, no drainage, no sign of where millions of gallons of water could have gone. Just a gaping hollow in the earth, steaming faintly as if the ground itself had swallowed it whole. What happened next baffled scientists, terrified locals, and left behind one of the strangest geological mysteries in modern history. Because when something that big disappears without explanation, you start to wonder if the answer lies deeper than science can dig. If you enjoy uncovering real-world mysteries and stories that defy logic, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and stay with me till the end, as we unravel the chilling story of the lake that vanished into the earth, like it never existed. Millhaven was one of those small, scenic towns that didn't make it onto most maps. Tucked between rolling hills and thick pine forests, it was a place where life moved at a pace that hadn't changed in decades. Fewer than 2,000 people called it home, and most of them lived within walking distance of Lake Merrin, a body of water that had been the town's pride for generations. The lake stretched over 2 miles wide, its surface calm enough to mirror the clouds that drifted lazily above. It was the sort of place that made you stop your car just to take a picture. On warm days, kids skipped stones from the old dock, while anglers lined the banks, fishing for trout that shimmered beneath the water's glassy skin. In the evenings, couples walked the narrow trail that wound around its edges, the orange glow of the setting sun turning the water into molten gold. To the people of Millhaven, Lake Merrin wasn't just a part of the town, it was the town. It fed local farms through irrigation channels. It drew in tourists during summer months. Even the town's founding story revolved around it. According to an old sign posted near the dock, settlers had built their first cabins beside the lake in 1886 because the water was so clear you could see heaven beneath it. That line had become Millhaven's unofficial motto. But as comforting as the lake's presence was, it also carried whispers of unease. Some locals spoke about how it never froze right during winter, even in years when nearby rivers turned solid. Others said they could hear deep, distant rumbles at night, like thunder trapped beneath the water. Most brushed it off as old wives' tales. Everything changed, though, in the week leading up to April 4th. It started subtly. On March 28th, a few fishermen noticed strange circular ripples forming near the center of the lake. The weather had been calm, yet the water moved as if stirred from below. One man, Arthur Kane, claimed he saw the ripples forming perfect rings, expanding and fading into stillness again and again. It was like something breathing, he told the local newspaper later. By the next day, more people noticed the waterline dropping. Just an inch at first, nothing too alarming. The local environmental agency dismissed it as seasonal fluctuation. But the pattern continued. On March 30th, the waterline had fallen 6 inches. By April 2nd, it was down by nearly a foot. On April 3rd, the lake began to smell faintly of metal. People started talking in the grocery store, in the cafe, outside the church after Sunday service. Some thought it was a sinkhole forming. Others blamed fracking in the neighboring county. But what unsettled everyone most wasn't just the disappearing water, it was the silence that followed. The frogs stopped croaking. Birds that normally swooped low to skim the surface disappeared. Even the wind seemed to still. By dusk, the lake looked wrong, too flat, too calm, like a sheet of dark glass hiding something alive beneath. That night, residents living along the shoreline reported hearing sounds that no one could explain. A deep hum that rose and fell like machinery operating somewhere underground. Others heard popping noises, like air escaping through pressure valves. Dogs barked at the waterline, refusing to go near it. At 10:15 p.m., the town's motion sensors near the lake recorded a minor tremor, barely enough to rattle windows, but it was the first seismic activity ever recorded in that area. By midnight, the moon reflected perfectly off the water's surface, yet those who looked closely said it didn't behave like a reflection. It seemed off. As if the moon was distorted, its light bending strangely, like heat haze rising from a road. At around 1:40 a.m., a farmer named Elliot Granger, whose property bordered the lake's eastern edge, woke up to what he later described as a low groan coming from the ground. His first thought was that an earthquake was starting, but when he stepped out onto his porch, he saw the lake shimmering under the moonlight and moving. The waterline was falling right before his eyes. He ran closer, his boots sinking into the soft, trembling soil. He could hear a deep suction-like sound, as if the earth itself was drinking. Within minutes, the lake that had existed his entire life was sinking into the ground. Not draining outward, downward. By 2:30 a.m., it was half gone. By 3 o'clock, nothing remained but a foggy basin of wet mud and steam rising in thin white ribbons. When dawn came, the people of Millhaven stood in silence at the edge of what used to be their lake. The sun rose over an empty crater, wide, deep, and lifeless. Not a drop of water was left. And that's when the questions began. The morning after the lake vanished, Millhaven didn't sound the same. The usual hum of birdsong was gone. The air felt different, heavier, as if even oxygen had thickened with disbelief. People gathered along the former shoreline, staring in silence at what they could hardly believe was real. Where the calm, mirror-like surface of Lake Merrin once spread for miles, there now lay an immense crater of cracked soil, glistening with streaks of moisture. The air above it shimmered faintly, like heat rising from asphalt. A faint metallic scent lingered, sharp and unfamiliar, clinging to every breath. It looked like the end of the world had chosen Millhaven as its rehearsal ground. The first to arrive was Sheriff Dana Coyle, a woman who'd lived in town her whole life. She'd fished that lake as a kid, had her engagement photos taken beside it, and even lost a cousin to a boating accident there years earlier. When she stepped out of her cruiser that morning, she stood for a full minute without saying a word. "This isn't possible," she finally whispered. Local news arrived within hours. Drones flew overhead, capturing footage of what reporters would soon call the vanishing lake of Millhaven. The video spread like wildfire online, one of those clips you stumble upon that seems too surreal to be true. Comments poured in. "That's CGI. This has to be a hoax. Where did the water go?" But for those who stood there in person, there was no hoax, only the eerie silence of nature rearranging itself. By midday, the mayor cordoned off the area. Scientists and geologists from the nearby university arrived to take samples. They set up temporary tents, lugged in equipment, and began the methodical process of trying to understand what had just happened. At first, the working theory was simple: sinkhole collapse. A massive underground cavern must have opened beneath the lake, swallowing the water into subterranean channels. It wasn't unheard of. Similar events had occurred in parts of Florida, China, and Russia. But this wasn't like any sinkhole they'd ever seen. Dr. Harold Winslow, the lead geologist, was the first to notice something strange. The edges of the crater were too clean, smooth, almost sculpted. Normally, sinkholes leave jagged fractures and radial cracks spreading outward from the collapse. Here, the ground around the hole was perfectly stable, as if the lake bed had been scooped out deliberately. Even more alarming was the temperature. Winslow's instruments recorded that the soil within the crater was warm, nearly 20 degrees higher than the surrounding land. When they probed deeper, the temperature rose even more. Something beneath the surface was generating heat. Meanwhile, townsfolk began to share their stories, small, disjointed accounts that, when pieced together, painted a chilling timeline. Elliot Granger repeated what he'd seen that night: the lake sinking, the deep groaning noise, the feeling of the ground vibrating under his feet. He said that for hours afterward, he couldn't sleep. The next day, he found cracks running through his farmland, thin as spiderwebs, leading straight toward the vanished lake. Another resident, Abigail Shaw, claimed that her kitchen clock stopped at exactly 2:43 a.m., the same time the lake disappeared according to seismic data. When she replaced the batteries, it started again like nothing had happened. And then there were the sounds. Several people living near the crater swore they could hear something beneath the earth, like a slow rush of water echoing from deep below. A few described it as breathing. By the second night, those sounds became clearer. Locals recorded faint, rhythmic pulses coming from the ground. The audio, when analyzed, didn't match any known mechanical or seismic frequency. It was organic, almost alive. That was when the town's unease turned into fear. Children who used to play near the shore now cried at the sight of it. Dogs barked endlessly when taken too close, tails tucked, whining until they were pulled away. Farmers began noticing strange sink marks appearing on their land, small at first, like soft depressions, as if the ground was slowly inhaling. And yet, for all the chaos and confusion, the crater remained calm. Still, quiet, almost peaceful in its emptiness. Dr. Winslow and his team decided to lower a high-resolution camera into the hole. The footage they retrieved defied easy explanation. At first, the camera descended through mist and debris. Then, around 180 feet down, it showed something unexpected, layers of sediment glowing faintly under infrared light. The soil wasn't just wet, it was radiating faint energy. The readings spiked intermittently, forming strange patterns of heat. When the camera reached 400 feet, the signal cut out completely. They tried again the next morning. The same result. At precisely the same depth, the feed went black, accompanied by a sharp burst of static that nearly blew out the monitor speakers. By then, the media had descended on Millhaven in full force. News vans lined the narrow town roads, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Conspiracy channels online began spinning theories, government experiments, secret mining operations, alien involvement. But what people in Millhaven wanted most were answers, and none came. The mayor held a town hall in the high school gym on April 6th. The meeting was tense. Locals demanded to know if the ground beneath their homes was safe. Dr. Winslow stood before them, adjusting his glasses, and admitted what no scientist ever wants to say. "We don't know what caused it," he said. "And we don't know where the water went." Those words hit like a hammer. Theories spread faster than any official explanation could keep up. Some old-timers swore they remembered a similar event told in stories passed down by their grandparents, an older lake that had once existed before Merrin, in nearly the same spot. Others said the land had always been restless, that the earth beneath Millhaven wasn't as stable as maps suggested. A few even whispered that the lake wasn't gone at all, that it had simply moved deeper. By April 8th, the crater began to change. The soil along the rim hardened into dark, brittle crusts, and faint wisps of steam rose at night, especially when the temperature dropped. Scientists collected samples that showed traces of newly formed minerals, compounds never before seen in that area. And then, something even stranger occurred. A photographer from the Herald-Post captured an aerial image at sunrise. The mist rising from the crater had formed into a perfect spiral, curling clockwise toward the center. Meteorologists later confirmed there was no wind strong enough to have caused such a pattern. The photo went viral within hours. To some, it was proof of geothermal activity. To others, it was an omen. But to those who lived closest, it was something else entirely. Because that same night, people reported seeing faint lights, soft, blue flickers, emanating from the crater floor. They came and went, pulsing in a slow rhythm, like a heartbeat under the ground. And from that moment, Millhaven stopped sleeping. The once peaceful town had become the stage for something vast, ancient, and unseen. The lake hadn't just vanished, it had awakened something beneath it. By the time a week had passed since the disappearance, Millhaven no longer resembled the peaceful little town it once was. The sound of construction trucks, generators, and news drones had replaced the gentle rhythm of waves and wind. The lake that had defined generations was now a cordoned-off exclusion zone, a ring of orange safety tape, metal barricades, and warning signs. Still, people came. They came to see it for themselves, to stand at the edge of the void that had erased the lake overnight. And for most, what they saw was impossible to process. The crater was far deeper than anyone had first imagined. From ground level, you could only see a fraction of it. Once geologists sent laser scanners down, the measurements stunned them, over 1,100 feet deep, descending in layers like an inverted mountain. But what truly disturbed everyone wasn't the depth. It was the geometry. The hole wasn't shaped like a typical sinkhole, jagged and uneven. It was circular, almost perfect in form, with symmetrical ridges running around its walls, as though carved by something with precision. Dr. Harold Winslow and his research team had now turned the site into a makeshift base. They erected tents and lab modules beside the crater, setting up instruments to monitor seismic activity, air composition, and magnetic fluctuations. They wanted data, anything that could tell them how millions of gallons of water vanished without a trace. But the more they studied, the stranger things became. For one, there were no drainage tunnels or visible channels leading away from the hole. Ground-penetrating radar found nothing beneath the surface but compact bedrock, no fissures, no caverns, no voids large enough to absorb the lake. It was like the water had simply ceased to exist. Even more baffling were the magnetic readings. Winslow's instruments kept flickering with anomalies, spikes that came in rhythmic intervals, similar to the pulses people reported hearing at night. Whatever was down there, it was producing measurable energy. And then came the sound recordings. An audio technician from the university installed deep surface microphones along the crater's rim to record subterranean noise. When the team played back the data, the sounds were unsettling. Beneath the constant hum of the earth, there were periodic hollow echoes, like vast chambers far below, reverberating softly. Some clips captured faint vibrations that almost resembled tones. Winslow tried to dismiss it as interference or shifting rock plates, but the pattern repeated itself every evening between 2:40 and 2:50 a.m., the same window of time when the lake had originally vanished. By mid-April, they dug a temporary ramp down the side of the crater so small teams could collect samples closer to the center. The first descent happened on April 14th. The crew of 5 geologists and technicians, equipped with respirators and harnesses, moved carefully across the dusty slopes. The air grew warmer the deeper they went. Around 400 feet down, a faint smell of sulfur filled the air. One technician described it as the scent of a storm trapped underground. The deeper they descended, the more they noticed a shimmering sheen coating parts of the soil, tiny reflective crystals embedded within the clay. They weren't natural minerals from the region. When they brought samples back to the surface, laboratory analysis found silicate structures that had partially crystallized at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That discovery made no geological sense. Nothing that hot should have existed under a freshwater lake. The news spread instantly. Every media outlet wanted a piece of the mystery. Some headlines screamed about a hidden volcano awakening beneath Millhaven. Others called it Earth's most unexplained collapse. But something else began happening that no one outside the town understood. The nighttime hum grew louder. Residents miles away from the site claimed their windows rattled at odd hours. Power lines flickered. Pets hid under furniture. And people began to report strange dreams, all eerily similar. They dreamed of standing at the edge of the vanished lake, staring into its depths as faint blue lights pulsed below, moving in spirals. Some dreamed of hearing voices calling from beneath the earth, whispering their names in distorted echoes. The town doctor, Henry Colton, began keeping a list of patients complaining about sleeplessness, nausea, and mild disorientation. He noticed a pattern. Every one of them lived within 3 miles of the crater. Meanwhile, Winslow's team pushed forward with the investigation. On April 18th, They deployed an automated probe into the crater, a drone equipped with sensors and a light array capable of mapping in complete darkness. The footage that came back stunned everyone. For the first few hundred feet, the view was familiar: layers of dirt, stone, compact clay. But around the 900-foot mark, the walls began to change. The rock wasn't natural anymore. It was smooth, too smooth, with faint linear striations running parallel like markings. The probe's thermal camera registered spikes in heat, forming circular patterns embedded in the wall. It looked almost manufactured. Then, as the drone descended beyond 1,050 feet, the feed abruptly went black. Seconds later, the instruments at the surface went haywire. Temperature sensors spiked. Magnetic meters went off scale. For a few seconds, the ground itself seemed to vibrate with a deep, bass-like resonance that everyone could feel in their chest. When the tremor passed, the probe was gone. No signal, no trace. The next morning, when the team tried again, they found something new. The crater had partially shifted. Sections of the inner wall had collapsed inward, and the previously smooth surfaces were gone, buried beneath loose soil and debris. It was as if the earth had sealed itself shut. That was the point where authorities stepped in. The Department of Geological Safety ordered all non-essential personnel out of the area. The crater was now officially classified as a geological hazard zone. But not everyone obeyed. That night, a group of 3 local thrill-seekers snuck past the barricades with flashlights and cell phones. They wanted to record a video for social media, proof, as they called it, that the government was hiding something. They never made it out. The next morning, rescuers found 2 abandoned backpacks and a shattered phone halfway down the slope. The last video recorded on the phone was only 12 seconds long. It showed a shaky view of the crater floor and something faintly glowing in the darkness below. The clip ended abruptly with a distorted screech, followed by silence. No bodies were ever recovered. Within days, the military arrived. Trucks rolled in, carrying unmarked equipment. They erected metal fencing and restricted airspace over Millhaven. Reporters were forced to stay outside a 1-mile perimeter. The town's residents, once curious, were now terrified. They whispered about what had been found, what the government wasn't saying. Some packed up and left entirely, abandoning homes that had stood for generations. By the end of April, Millhaven felt like a ghost town. The air smelled faintly of burnt metal, and the hum beneath the earth pulsed stronger than ever. Dr. Winslow's team was finally pulled from the site. Before he left, he recorded one final note in his field journal. "We came looking for a hole in the ground," he wrote. "But this isn't a hole. It's something else. Something alive, or something waiting." And though the investigation officially ended that week, locals swear they still hear it at night, a deep, slow heartbeat echoing beneath the soil, counting down to something they cannot name. When federal agents took control of the crater site, Millhaven changed overnight. Roadblocks were set up at every major entrance to town, soldiers patrolled the once busy streets, and the sound of helicopters echoed through the valley at odd hours of the night. For the residents who remained, life became a waking dream, or perhaps a slow-burning nightmare. They could no longer approach the site, but the feeling of it was everywhere. The vibrations that once gently hummed beneath their feet now pulsed stronger, sometimes rattling dishes on kitchen shelves. Streetlights flickered for no reason. Dogs howled at nothing. And through it all, a single question loomed larger each day. What was the government hiding in that hole? The official explanation given to local media was vague, a geological anomaly of unknown origin. That was it. No details, no updates, no follow-up press conferences. Within a week, the entire area surrounding the crater was hidden behind tall steel fencing draped with black tarps. The scientists from the university were dismissed without warning. Their research equipment was confiscated. Even Dr. Winslow himself was forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement before being escorted out. But a few of them, particularly Martha Vale, the town's head librarian, refused to stay silent. Martha wasn't a scientist, but she had something even more powerful: the town's history. The Forgotten Files. 2 days after the government sealed off the site, Martha began combing through the Millhaven Historical Archives, located in the basement of the old courthouse. Dusty folders, yellowed maps, brittle newspapers, everything that told the story of the land before the town was founded. She discovered something unsettling. In an old ledger from 1897, she found references to a different body of water in the exact same spot where Lake Merrin later formed. It was called the Hollow Basin. According to the record, the basin had filled with water after a massive thunderstorm in 1885, but before that, it was described as a dry depression, feared by early settlers who claimed the ground would breathe in their presence. One passage written by a local minister read, "The earth hums beneath our feet. At times it is soft and yielding, at others it trembles and sings. We built no homes near the hollow, for it is said the land remembers." Another entry, dated October 1903, described a sudden event where the newly formed lake vanished overnight, just like it had in 2025. It was dismissed at the time as an earthquake, but there was no record of tremors occurring that year anywhere in the region. Then, for decades, the hollow basin vanished from all official maps, until the lake refilled naturally in 1911, this time renamed Lake Merrin. It was as though the land itself had rewritten its memory. Connecting the past and present, Martha began overlaying old survey maps on top of modern satellite images. When aligned, the patterns were uncanny. Every natural feature surrounding the current crater, the slope of the hills, the curves of the forest line, even the nearby streams, matched the ancient layouts described in 19th-century documents. But one detail stood out. The 1903 map depicted a series of subterranean lines radiating outward from the hollow basin, drawn by hand in red ink. At first, she assumed they were roads or irrigation routes. Then she realized something terrifying: they weren't roads. They were fault lines, lines that didn't exist anymore. Or at least, they didn't exist on paper. Using geological data she'd quietly downloaded before the government shut down public access, she discovered that those same fault lines were active again, forming slowly beneath the earth, converging beneath Millhaven like veins leading to a heart. She took her findings to Sheriff Dana Coyle, who was still trying to maintain order in a town rapidly unraveling. Dana listened in silence, her brow furrowed. "You're saying this happened before?" she asked. "Twice," Martha replied. "And both times, the same thing followed. People started disappearing." Dana looked at her sharply. Martha explained that several entries in 1903 and 1912 listed missing settlers, mostly men who had worked near the basin. No bodies were ever recovered. The incidents were chalked up to accidents or wanderings, but the pattern was unmistakable. Every disappearance happened within 2 weeks of the lake vanishing. And as the two women talked, the clock in the sheriff's office trembled on the wall, a subtle vibration that neither of them wanted to acknowledge. The crater awakens. By late April, even from miles away, residents began noticing faint light emanating from the horizon at night, soft blue flickers glowing above the tree line where the lake once was. The government denied any unusual activity, blaming it on research lighting. But locals knew better. One night, a delivery driver passing through town stopped on the highway after seeing something he couldn't explain. From his vantage point, the entire crater glowed like an enormous ember pulsing beneath the ground, light seeping up through cracks in the soil, spreading outward like veins of fire. The footage he captured on his dashcam lasted only 30 seconds before static overtook it completely. He uploaded it online. Within 12 hours, the government had the video removed from every major platform. Meanwhile, the hum had become a resonance, a low, rhythmic pulse that rolled through the valley at precise intervals. Some people timed it. Every 84 minutes, exactly, the sound rose and fell like a slow, steady heartbeat. Martha began to suspect that the crater wasn't just reacting, it was responding. To what? No one knew. Whispers beneath the ground. A few nights later, Martha drove up to the observation perimeter, now guarded by federal personnel. She parked in the shadows, cut her lights, and listened. The wind was still. The night was cold. And beneath it all, faint but unmistakable, came the hum. Except this time, it wasn't just a sound. It was layered, like thousands of overlapping whispers, rising and falling in unison, echoing from deep beneath the earth. She recorded the noise on her phone and brought it to a friend, a sound engineer who owed her a favor. When he ran the file through a spectrogram, his face went pale. Hidden within the low frequencies were patterns of repetition, not random, but structured, almost rhythmic, like a form of communication. And the most unsettling part? The waveform repeated the same shape, a spiral. Signs of collapse. The following day, tremors rippled across the outskirts of town. Small cracks appeared on roadways. A section of forest near the eastern ridge slumped into the soil, swallowing several acres of trees. Residents were told it was just ground settlement. But the tremors grew stronger. Some claimed they could see the land breathing again, rising and falling ever so slightly, as if the earth was exhaling. Sheriff Coyle and Martha met one final time before dawn. Martha showed her a printout of the sound wave pattern she discovered, the same spiral seen in the mist above the crater weeks earlier. "What if it's not a hole?" Martha said quietly. "What if it's a door?" The sheriff didn't respond. She didn't have to. Both women knew something beneath Millhaven was stirring. And this time, it wasn't just taking water. As the first rays of morning light broke over the horizon, a deep, resonant vibration rolled through the ground, longer and louder than any before. Car alarms went off. Birds scattered into the sky. The entire valley seemed to hold its breath. Then, silence. No one knew it yet, but the next tremor would change everything. Because in less than 24 hours, the earth beneath Millhaven would move again, and this time it wouldn't stop. The morning of April 27th began like any other day in Millhaven. Gray sky, a cold wind sweeping down from the northern hills, and the air still thick with that uneasy hum that had become the town's constant companion. By now, nearly half the residents had fled. Those who stayed did so out of stubbornness or disbelief, convinced the danger was exaggerated. But for the few who had seen the crater pulse with light, who had felt the vibrations in their bones, there was no comfort left, only a quiet waiting for something they couldn't name. At 6:14 a.m., the ground stirred again. It began with a faint shiver, a subtle movement that rattled windows but didn't shatter them. Martha Vale, still awake in her study, froze as her cup of tea rippled on the desk, tiny concentric waves dancing across its surface. She reached for the map she'd been working on, comparing the spiral waveform she'd found in the hum to the fault lines running beneath the town. They matched perfectly. She realized then that the door she described wasn't a metaphor. The earth beneath Millhaven wasn't collapsing, it was unfolding. The final pulse. At precisely 6:21 a.m., the hum stopped. Completely. For the first time in weeks, the valley fell into absolute silence. The absence of sound was so abrupt, so unnatural, that people stepped outside their homes just to listen. Birds were motionless in the trees. Even the air felt still, suspended. Then, at 6:23 a.m., a sound unlike anything ever recorded rolled through the earth. It was deep and resonant, like thunder striking from beneath the ground. The vibrations hit every structure in town, knocking objects from shelves and splitting asphalt. Windows shattered inward. The church bell, untouched by human hands, began to toll on its own. And then came the light. From the crater's edge, a column of luminescent mist shot skyward, spiraling like smoke caught in a cyclone. It wasn't fire, but it glowed with a cold, almost liquid blue, illuminating the valley like daylight. Within that column were shapes, patterns moving as though alive, shifting in circular motion, almost rhythmic. Every camera that tried to capture the moment glitched. Power grids failed. The emergency lines went dead. Martha, standing on her porch with her phone raised, watched in disbelief as the light spread outward, flowing like a river through the air. It passed silently over the fields, across rooftops, and toward the distant ridge. Then, without warning, it snapped back into the crater, vanishing as suddenly as it appeared. The earth convulsed once more. A deep rumble rose from below, followed by a distant echoing crack that seemed to come from miles underground. Then silence again. When the dust settled, the crater was gone. Not filled in, gone. In its place was a vast, smooth depression of hardened soil, cold to the touch and dry as bone. Where once there had been a wound in the earth, now there was only the faint outline of a spiral, burned faintly into the ground like a scar. The disappearance. When federal teams returned the next day, they found something they couldn't explain. The monitoring equipment left at the site was gone, not damaged or buried, but missing entirely, as though it had never been there. Vehicles stationed along the perimeter were discovered empty, engines off, keys still in the ignition. Of the 12 personnel assigned to the night shift, none were found. Only one camera survived, a static pole-mounted unit located several miles away. The footage it captured showed a brief flash of light at 6:23 a.m., followed by what appeared to be ripples spreading across the sky like waves moving through water. The last frame before the feed cut out showed the crater beginning to collapse inward, not from impact, but as though the land was inhaling. And then nothing. The footage was never released publicly. The town left behind. Millhaven was declared uninhabitable by early May. The government blamed geological instability, citing sinkholes and soil liquefaction as primary hazards. But those who lived through it knew better. They could still feel the faint vibration under their feet long after the official reports stopped coming. Martha Vale disappeared 2 weeks later. Her car was found near the old overlook, doors unlocked, the driver's seat empty. On the passenger side sat her journal, its last entry dated April 26th, the night before the final tremor. It read, "If it comes back, it won't be for the water. It will be for whatever we took from it. The ground remembers. The hum is not a sound, it's a heartbeat. And when it stops, it's not because it's gone. It's because it's listening." The journal was taken into custody by the Department of Geological Safety and never seen again. Echoes of what was lost. By late summer, Millhaven had become a ghost town. Grass grew over the streets. The old diner sign still flickered at night, powered by a generator that no one had turned off. The air felt heavier somehow, thicker, like it carried the memory of something vast and ancient. But the strangest thing was the rain. When it finally returned after weeks of drought, residents in neighboring towns noticed that water collected strangely along the valley floor. The drops didn't soak into the ground, they seemed to slide, pooling in perfect circles before vanishing into the soil as if drawn by an invisible pull. A geologist from the University of Montana visited the site under the pretense of soil analysis. He collected a small amount of dirt from the crater's edge, sealed it in a sterile glass jar, and left. 2 days later, he called his department's lab technician in a panic. The soil had begun to vibrate on its own. Not visibly, but audibly. The final silence. As months passed, the story of Millhaven faded from public consciousness. News outlets moved on. The footage was suppressed. The region was fenced off permanently, labeled a restricted conservation zone. But truckers driving through the valley at night still report something. They describe a faint shimmer in the darkness, like moonlight reflected on water where no water exists. And if you pull over and cut your engine, they say you can hear it, a low, steady hum, rising and falling from deep beneath the ground. Those who've heard it all say the same thing. It's not just sound. It's breathing. And on quiet nights, if you listen closely enough, you can hear what sounds like rippling waves, gentle at first, then stronger, echoing from somewhere below. Almost as if a lake is still there, far beneath the surface, waiting to return. What happened beneath Millhaven that April morning remains one of the most confounding geological and perhaps spiritual mysteries of our time. An entire lake gone, a town erased, and a silence that still hums beneath the soil, like the earth itself remembering something it cannot forget. Maybe it was nature reclaiming what was once its own. Maybe it was something older, something deep beneath the surface that was never meant to be disturbed. But whatever truth lies beneath that vanished lake, it's still there, waiting, listening. If you ever find yourself driving through a quiet valley and you feel the ground tremble just slightly under your feet, don't wait to see what happens next. Because sometimes the earth doesn't take things away to destroy them. Sometimes it takes them back to keep them. If you found this story chilling, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. We explore the world's strangest disappearances, unexplained phenomena, and mysteries buried deep beneath the surface. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and listen closely. The earth remembers.